Here he is, our Tuesday regular from the province and Post Media Canucks beat writer, Mr. Patrick Johnston. How you doing?
I'm well rested, boys. How are we doing? It's been
Good.
a while.
I'm glad you're rested.
Oh my God, what a week!
Busy weekend.
Oh,
We were asking, we started asking this on Sunday's emergency podcast, but we continued the discussion a little bit more into yesterday and our first opportunity to talk to you. There are so many people upset with the Canucks, and so many seem to be pointing their arrows right now at Chairman Francesco Aquilini. Is this an inflection point for this ownership group? Do things change fundamentally for this ownership group and the relationship of the fans and the community with the club and the ownership group after Bruce?
it could be. It's hard to imagine how it could, how this turns anything. I think the worm has already turned. I think the frustration levels out there are so high. There are still obviously people that are going to show up to games. This is, it is still the big show in town. But I think a lot about that game on Saturday night and how loud that Let's Go Oilers was at the beginning of the game. It was as loud as any I've ever heard. And I said, could it be going back to the 80s? Things are poor. That they're way, 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 way down. And so the Boudreau experience, fans I think appreciated, okay, change happens. You don't win, that's going to happen. But just hanging him out to dry for, people talk about a week. Well, how about 2 months? I mean, Boudreau thought he was going to be done in November. We all thought he might be. We talked about this in November. I took the picture of him sitting on the bench by himself. And then it just dragged on and on and on. And he kept showing up to work, and people kind of, in the end, there was that love that people had for him. He's a friendly fellow. His personality draws people to him. And so I don't think it's necessarily Boudreau himself. It's just that things are terrible. And it's that, as we've said before, it's the put up or shut up time. Like this new group came in, this management team came in, and there was sort of this, okay, they're the fresh new hope. Maybe something will actually finally get in a direction. We'll feel like there's a coherent direction, a plan. And instead, as Boudreau himself has, not much has changed. Rutherford himself has said, not much has changed. And so now we're at that point, I guess. I mean, if you're looking for a point, now it really is, okay, you got your coach. Where does this go from here? Are you actually going to be able to reshape this? This roster hasn't been working, and there's been 2 different coaches that have struggled to do it. A third coach is not going to change that. You need to change the complexion of this. And, if you're looking for one thing that could change fans' minds, they do make forward progress in rebuilding the roster.
The crowd would have potentially been more more favorable to Boudreau if there weren't so many Oiler fans in there, although the Oiler fans might have had empathy for Boudreau as well. Let's go to the poll question right now. What do you think fans are cheering for right now? Do you think fans want to see a little bit of a Tocchet bounce? Like you might just be sick of the losing. For the casual fan, might want to see some goals and some wins here. Or do you think the overwhelming majority still have their eye on the prize of a top lottery pick?
It's a fascinating question to me, and as soon as you mentioned it, I was thinking about it because obviously the incentive for the big picture for the team is to keep losing, but casual fans, I mean, there's just still, I think that is the state of the fan base too, is that it's just still a large amount of sort of casual fans, but the challenge for the team, in this business is to create sticky, dedicated loyalist fans. So the casual fan wants to see a win. The dedicated fan probably wants to see a loss because, they want to see some direction. But at the same time, I things are so burnt out. Like it's such a difficult thing. I think in the end, in their hearts, in the end, fans just want to see some wins. It's like us, right? We'd rather talk about wins. If you made us pick one thing, we'd rather talk about a win because a win is more interesting to talk about. I think as much as the big picture thing is that they should be cheering for losses, I think most fans, they just want to see some wins. That it is that very basic reality.
It's an interesting first game for Tocchet, right? Like they're facing a team that is very clearly trying to lose games, and much to their chagrin, they've won 6 of the last 10. But
just point of order, because I know it's going to come up the rest of the year. The organization is trying to lose games.
Yes.
The team
Right.
itself
Yes.
and the players,
Yes.
as everyone says, they
God,
always
do
try.
we have to say it every show?
We do, because every show we get messages like, guys, they're pro athletes. They
I
don't
know,
play to
it's-
lose. No, we
Yeah,
get it.
yeah.
It's
Coaches
shocking.
and players, competitive people, they give their best each and every night, or at least pay lip service to that. But they're trying to win. Organizations are trying to lose.
But they're looking across the ice here, PJ, at a team that's that's doing it right, and they're going to get worse too, because Kane and Taves will be gone by the end of the year as well.
Yeah, and that's that in the end, it's that short-term pain thing that this ownership group has never been tolerant of, never been willing to even entertain. Instead, it's sort of, let's throw stuff at the wall, and maybe this time it will be different. Well, it hasn't been different, and that's why we're standing here on the third coach in 13 months. And it is insane to me how the chairman, Francesco Aquilini, thinks that one of these days it's going to work out, because it hasn't worked out. And in the end, you go back, and I'm tired of beating the drum, but it has to be beaten. The 4 years before they started getting involved under Mike Gillis were the most profitable period of time for this team. They let the experts do their work. They have not been letting the experts do their work. And now we look where they stand. And then I understand, I heard it from two different people in recent days, like the brothers are, Paolo and Roberto are mad at their brother again, and I can understand why, because this was a project that they went into to make money. They haven't been making money, and they can see what's going on. They can see the chaos that ensues. The brand is a disaster in the community. And the family name is getting tied to the brand.
That's it.
That's it. And that's what's mattered.
That's it.
That goes all the way back to
bottom line
More
based, or
so
is it
than ever
sentiment?
before, gentlemen, the word Canuck sits beside the name Aquilini in disrepute to the largest number that I think we've
for sure.
seen in their stewardship of the Vancouver Canucks. So that's the problem there. But here's the thing, Patrick. Roberto and Paolo can get as angry as they want. Unless there's going to be a coup, all that matters is Luigi. The guy's nearly 90 years old. What have you heard about the patriarch? Is he still lucid? Is he still involved? Is he still... because typically when things go wrong for the Vancouver Canucks, the family gets more involved. So have you heard anything about Luigi?
I haven't heard directly. I mean, his presence is always there. You said it. I mean, this is he has guided the family philosophy. Everything they do is based on his guiding philosophy, and it was kind of amazing. There was a National Post profile from 2009 that popped up last week, and I highlighted it. That essentially his guiding philosophy is there's never money in the sell, only in the buy. Look for stuff that's cheap and then let it appreciate. But there are times when he basically is going to step in, and that has happened in the past. So I don't know. I don't know where that stands. Certainly, in the past, smart people. I know that some smart people at one point gave them advice, basically saying what you guys shouldn't be doing is talking about developing a practice rink across the street. You should be buying the property across the street, building a new rink over there, and then you can redevelop the property the current rink is sitting on. And he didn't want to do that, and that came down to him. That was his decision. I don't know. Obviously, it would have been complicated and expensive, but you can sit there outside and see wow, that sounds like kind of an impressive business approach. Get aggressive, but that's not been how they function. And we're sitting here. How they've been owning the team. I never quite know how to say how long they've been owning the team. They've been owning the team almost, if you want, since they first bought it 50%, 2 decades. Since they've got full control, it's been 15 years. And things are not as good as they once were. They certainly were ascendant when they were first getting involved in the team. They were kind of starting to get, it was the West Coast Express. This was one of the best teams in the league at that point when they bought it. And then the value has done nothing but grow, although recently it has not. It has stagnated at best. And, you hear about people that are sniffing around, and, if there's a time to strike, sure, it's now because they're frustrated, but also who's going to buy the team if you can't buy the building? And if you can't buy the building, they built those towers, and that changes the whole dynamic. Who's going to buy a team without the building, unless they have plans to build a building somewhere else?
Can I, and I'm not sure you know this, whose idea was Dale Talon, who right now works as a senior advisor, professional scout? And if it is, in fact, because we had heard Talon's name so many times in the years previous to Rutherford being hired, if Talon is, in fact, a confidant of ownership, is there any chance that Talon rises here? We've been talking about maybe Allvin has to rise now with Rutherford vowing that he's got to zip it more and not talk as publicly. But is there any chance that Talon gets more role, responsibility, a louder voice in the front office if, in fact, Rutherford is taking more of a backseat publicly and Allvin finally gets to execute the vision he's been waiting a year to execute?
It's tough to say. I mean, he lives in South Florida. He was at the game last Saturday, but he wasn't sitting with the scouting staff. He was sitting in the press box talking to some old buddies. But I mean, I had a hard time imagining he doesn't see those guys all the time. So I don't know. It's tough to say. It's certainly, there's old ties between him and Rutherford. I think everyone's instinct initially was that his job was essentially a favor. He'd quote unquote do some pro scouting. Maybe they could call him about this or that and the other. But I think back honestly to when they traded for Riley Stillman, a player that Talon, in theory would have been very familiar with, given that he was drafted by the Florida Panthers when Talon was in and around the Panthers. I think the year they drafted him, he actually wasn't. He was sort of in the middle of the Computer Boys era. He was not a Computer Boys draft pick, to be clear, but that was that era. But he's a player that was in their system certainly once he came back. But I asked Allvin about him at the time, and Allvin sort of said, "Well, he didn't really directly answer." But I mean, Allvin never really directly answers anything. So I was kind of left wondering, okay, was Talon involved or was he not? My impression is still that he is sort of just a side project, project's too much of a word.
A favor hire.
A favor
hire. I mean,
my impression is that's where it stands. I mean, I have no doubt, given that I think someone did suggest that he was talked to before they hired Rutherford, right? Did I see that? Right? That's been out there.
Yeah.
Yep.
So obviously the owner has his phone number. So yeah, I don't know. I don't have the impression that there's sort of a sort of a shadow government or anything like that.
Oh wow! How about this? No. This is taking a turn.
No, I don't have the impression that there's anything like that, or that that there's anything.
Well, no, I just asked because what do they call them in Edmonton? The red wine summits. That
yes,
you've got people in charge of the team, but if Daryl Cates is going out and drinking nice cab savs with Gretz and coffee and some of the old boys, then maybe that's where actually the decisions
that was
are
the
made.
Shadow government. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think. I mean, I don't have an impression that there's any particular group of ex-players. I mean, we know the connections between the Aquilinis and the Courtnalls, but there's not a large collection of ex-players who have a pile of fondness for this ownership group. I can tell you that much.
We asked her the poll question of what the fans.
You don't think Trevor's breaking him off a call here and there,
yeah,
going, Frank,
no,
really?
I don't think so. No.
Okay.
We asked her the poll question what the fans would want. What's actually going to happen here? We saw the first practice under Rick Tocchet yesterday. That was a very different vibe than a Bruce Boudreau practice. It was kind of old school, fast, hot laps and one-on-one battle drills and that sort of thing, and some meeting of the minds with Foote and Gonchar both out there on the ice. Can Rick Tocchet make this team be profoundly different? Maybe this team's just so dysfunctional and so poorly constructed that there will be no new coach bump, but what do you think?
Well, I mean, battle drill's great, fine, whatever. But I mean, the fact of the matter is, every game, I talked about this. I think I've talked about this last week. Then Steve Stamkos scored a goal. Every game of late, there has been a goal scored essentially where a forward, opposing forward, is lost, around the net in an exchange between essentially defensive coverage, zones coverage between defensemen and the low forward. And Steve Stamkos did it. Paul Stastny did it last Sunday or 2 Sundays ago in Carolina. It happened the night before in Florida. It just was happening every game where a guy would literally be standing by himself by the side of the net, and the goalie had no chance. The puck would come to him, and boom, it's in the net. Rick Tocchet can fix those problems. I mean, yeah, sure, but to me that is the issue. Obviously he's been talking a lot about penalty killing, and that's an obvious issue. How do you make this better? How do you make it different? Because it's all time bad. If you want to know how all-time bad is, you follow JPat's Twitter account because he's all over it. That to me is the question: is okay, he's been brought in because there was obvious flaws in the Boudreau system, which was their defensive efforts were terrible, their penalty killing was terrible. If they can create a better environment for their goalies, sure, they have a chance to win some more games. But is that down to systems or is that down to personnel? When you look at guys like Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Tyler Myers, who are good dudes and have had pretty good careers, but they don't move like they used to. And I had someone mention to me the other day that they see a lot of bad habits. Like Myers had sort of eliminated bad habits last year. There were a lot of bad habits he eliminated. He had a pretty good season last year, but they're kind of back. And you can't. Again, this is one of these ones. Yeah. I think I banged the drum on, and I think we underrate the loss of Brad Shaw and all this because he had fixed the PK, and certainly defensively they were playing better than they were this year, and that's a big difference. And things like that do matter. How you set up people, where you put them, what you tell them to do.
Interesting quote from JT Miller to your colleague, Mr. Kuzma. It's a quiet group. I feel like there's a void to fill, and sometimes I get too worked up, and it comes out the wrong way. It's been a hard season. It's been very difficult for me. And this goes back to something I was reporting last year, that, Miller is not at a loss very often and is happy to speak up and see if people will follow. What did you make of JT Miller calling it a quiet group? Because as Jeff later pointed out in a tweet, Mr. Patterson, maybe it's just a quiet group because you loud.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of had that thought. It's something that I've been trying to kind of dig at. Like, what is it like when they come off the ice? How do they express their frustration? And the Miller dynamic, and we've talked about this before. As I said last year, late in the season, he talked a lot about knowing, how his voice can cut two ways and how he had to be a little more smart about it. And then the contrast to, especially, the first half of the season when it was just bombastic and everybody getting fed up. And, you see clips like the one of Elias Pettersson kind of rolling his eyes on the bench the other night about Miller's reaction.
Yes.
And then also me asking Miller at the beginning of the season, like, is it possible you overhype yourself? And he goes, no, I can't play calm. And I'm like, okay, but that's literally what Tocchet talked about on the weekend. He needs to be calmer, basically. But the room itself, I mean, Quinn Hughes, on the night Quinn Hughes dropped his bomb about Tanner Pearson, right before that, he was talking about the passion in the group and how much, Horvat cares, how much Miller cares, how much Pettersson cares, how much Brock Besser cares. And I kind of was like, that's an interesting one because we have this notion of Besser being this kind of happy, not happy-go-lucky, but kind of laid-back surfer dude almost. And I talked to a few people about trying to get into that. The Besser is obviously, still a guy that I think would be interested in a new home. He doesn't talk about it, but I don't think that any of that part of the story has changed. There was frustration. I mean, there's a new coach, so maybe that will change the dynamic. But until Saturday night, that was certainly something that was in the back burner, and trying to get a sense of, who is this guy? Is he more passionate than people realize? And I follow up with Hughes, and he goes, yeah, well, he basically said, yeah, he said, he cares a lot. And then I talked to Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and Oliver basically said, obviously as a guy that's came to this team, he said he didn't, he had he did no real impression of Besser other than, he knew he was a pretty good goal scorer. And I'd heard he was a nice guy. And he said, no, he gets loud. Like, there are times when he gets frustrated. He speaks up. And so I found myself thinking, yeah, I mean, okay, sure, it may not be all. JT Miller clearly is the loudest guy in the room, so in relative terms, it could be quiet. But I don't have the impression that this is a room that just comes in and sulks and mopes and feels terrible, because I think we know that Luke Schenn speaks with passion and Tyler Myers speaks with passion. Miller's impression, I mean, I can't deny him his impression. He feels like it's a quiet room, and he feels like that's a gap he has to fill. But that's certainly been the reputation he's always had, which is that he is a loud person. I guess I didn't make much of it. Nothing. I mean, it didn't surprise me in the end. I kind of more chuckled about the fact that the discussion has come back to where we were at the end of last season, which is that these sort of need to be a little more calm and measured. JT Miller versus over the top JT Miller that he said he seemed to want to be at the beginning of the season.
You're always calm and measured.
Oh, thank you.
You've got such a good head on your shoulders. Steady Eddie.
Wish he was my high school teacher.
Absolutely.
Oh, God.
Wouldn't he have been a cool high school teacher and
Yeah.
rugby coach? I would have gotten along with Mr. Johnston, famously at Kit Secondary. Buddy, thank you for this. You have a wonderful week. We will catch up next Tuesday during the bye if you're...
Yeah, I'll be around.
So,
I mean, I will say this,
okay.
boys. There have been moments, and certainly anybody who's played hockey or rugby with me knows that I've had.
Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't even know that.
Short fuse Johnson.
Yeah,
That's
I've learned, guys. You got it's just
Yeah.
don't put it's perfectly fine to care, but don't
Don't poke the bear.
Don't push your politics on me, pal.